Hey, friends. So, I want to talk to you for a few minutes about what's more important than the election. I've been thinking a lot about the election, like you have, I'm sure, and it's coming up soon. And I'm sure that we're either in a place where we're leaning towards one decision or we've already made a decision. But here's something I want to talk about, something that's more important than who you vote for or whether you write in or abstain. And I think that is very important because you have a voice in our nation, in our government. And so I think it's important to use it. Now, it's not a biblical command that you do that, but it's important. But I want to talk to you about something that's more important than that, and that is really how you live on every other day besides November 3rd, or on every other year besides election year every 4 years. So, looking at Paul in Acts 17, again, I want to reference uh, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission's great resource called the Courage and Civility Church Kit. And by the way, you can still use it even after the election. It's got some really good stuff in there. Highly recommend. And I'm going to riff off the third week, and I invite you to go dig in deeper. But it talks about Paul in Acts 17, and here's the situation. Paul was going down to Athens to meet up with some of his partners in ministry, and he had some extra time on his hands, basically. He was walking through the forum, the part of Athens where people would meet to buy things, sell things, discuss different ideas, and he passes by a statue to one of the gods, an unknown god, and you know the story. He ends up preaching to a little crowd there in Athens, and that leads to a bigger crowd at the Areopagus, which was a place of both a law court place and a place where just the dignitaries, the leaders of the city would often gather to discuss things. And it says, as Luke is recording, it says, they would these people would meet to discuss all kinds of things and really did nothing else but just share ideas. One of the things I draw from this story is how Paul engages unbelievers around him. He is what we call a public theologian. He's not just simply a theologian that's kind of back in the study, doing his own work, or like some theologians might think of their work as just academic. He's thinking of his calling as a theologian as something that's very public, that's to engage believers and unbelievers alike. So what does he do? He takes time to teach these unbelievers the actual state of things. Here is reality. Here's how here's who God is. Here's how he works in the world. And in fact, he's appointed all these people from all these nations, set them up, given their boundaries. Why? So that they might seek him and find them. And in these recent days, he has shown us the way to life and peace, and that is through his son Jesus, who is coming again to bring his kingdom. So anyway, Paul is giving them this teaching and trying to speak to them in ways that they can appreciate and understand. Now, he doesn't pull any punches. He's going to speak of the resurrection, which in that day and time, many of the different schools of philosophy would have laughed and scoffed at the idea of a physical resurrection, but he does. So he's not gonna waffle on his beliefs. He's going to say exactly what he believes, and yet he does it with civility. So there's a mixture of courage and civility there. He's going to stand strong, but he's doing it in a way that is full of compassion for these people and even curiosity. You can tell in the quotes that Paul uses that he has done some reading. He's read these pagan philosophers. You can tell in the way that he addresses the people there that he has a respect for them, and that he says, I see that you are very religious. And I don't think he's trying to mock them. I think that he's saying, look, I see that you value things of great meaning. So let me reveal to you, the true God, something that you are actually seeking. Maybe you didn't even know that you were. So I think that it's really a great lesson to draw from Paul, just in our own times. We're called to something called public theology, where we're teaching our neighbors and the people around us the truth of the way things really are in the world, and why things happen the way they do, and what is the inevitable outcome of those things, and what God is bringing as he's bringing his kingdom on earth. So how do we do that? I think we engage at the level and with the passions that God has given us. I think that we look and say, where has God placed me? The neighborhood, the workspace, um, and ask, okay, and then what is maybe the issue that He has drawn my attention to? A public issue, that's something that affects all kinds of different people. How can I maybe speak in with wisdom and insight from the Lord? I'll give you an example. So, just for myself, identity and thinking about how we grow up and develop with a sense of identity is something I've studied in my graduate work. And I engaged with some non-Christian secular psychologists, and I read their work and I asked, what have they discovered about identity and the way that we grow and develop and attach to identity? Man, identity is so key and so big in our culture today. People are always thinking about this, always talking about this. Whether it's a racial identity, whether it's gender identity, identity is very much a big topic. I want to speak into that in my own way and try to show people that look, yes, like there's all kinds of things that we can attach to and associate with ourselves. Identity really is about saying, look, I know who I am because I'm associated with this other group of people, this other thing. And that really tells me who I am. Now, I think our culture's gone way off the rails a lot of times by saying that identity is purely whatever I say I want to be, regardless of anyone else. And so, one way that I think I'm called to teach and speak in publicly is to say, look, we actually need an anchor. We need a grounding. We can't just say for ourselves, here's who I think I am. Here's how I'm going to be. That's just not the way the world works. And I want to do that with compassion for people who are confused about that. I think that people grow up in the world today and they look to older people for, a sense of identity, particularly around the teen years. And a lot of what they get in return is just a question mark put over their life. And we're not really sure what you are or what you're going to be. So you figure it out. And I think that's really damaging and hurtful. So I want to help people who are in that situation. So that's one way I feel like I'm called to speak into the culture. What about you? What are ways in which you can engage in public theology? Again, I want to say I think this is even more important than who we vote for on November 3rd, though that is really important, and you should take time to think about it. And then below, in the resources, I've given you several different resources to check out on that very question. But right now, I'm asking this question. What are you drawn to? What is the issue in our culture that our culture really needs you to speak into? And not just our culture, but people in your life that you can have a conversation with in a courageous and yet very civil way that shows compassion and curiosity for where they're coming from. So I want to end with a few quotes here and reflections before we go. Act wisely toward outsiders, making the most of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you should answer each person. Colossians 4:5-6. So in this passage here from the letter to the Colossians, Paul is saying, think about outsiders, those outside the church. Make the most of the time you have with those. Think about the neighbors you have around you. Think about the people at work. Think about your friends that you're seeking to love. Just unbelievers you're sharing the gospel with in your life, in your actions, in your words. And let your speech, here's the key point, be gracious, right? Gracious towards them. Right? What does that mean? That means having space for them to disagree with you, having space for you to have just diametrically opposed views, and allowing that to happen and still be civil, still be caring, loving, listening. And let your speech be seasoned with salt. Salty is both preservative and adds a tang, a taste. So there should be a sense in which the persons that we're talking with, right, they sense that there's something about this that is like a seasoning, that's like a little tang to the flavor of our conversations and our demeanor with them. That's different. That's spicy in a way, not distasteful, not like toxic, right, or vomiting, but that is instead preserving. It's like we're showing in our conversation, in our speech, the influence of Jesus Christ in this world, which is preserving this world from total corruption and evil and hate, and is also leading towards a final redemption of this world. So that's our speech should be like that, right? So that you may know how you should answer each person. And so we pursue this. I want to read this other quote here. Courageous and civil Christians then publicly discuss important political issues in a way that explains and affirms the nature of God and his work in the created order. We may not share the gospel in every political conversation, but every hot-button political debate gives us an opportunity to give other people a more accurate picture of the nature of God. The nature of man and the redeeming hope found in Jesus. It kind of speaks for its own, right? Every conversation is an opportunity, right, to give people an accurate picture of who God is, of what the reality of our world is, and people and human beings, and what we really need, and what's really broken in us, and what the solution is, what the real hope of humanity is. It's Jesus. If we desire more influence in the public square, Christians must become teachers who educate our opponents rather than rivals who dominate them. Think of your seasoned salt speech as a way to educate people, not condescendingly, right? But to share with them, like Paul did in Athens, right? In an understanding way, he shared with them the truth of this is what reality is, if you can accept it. Paul deliberately explained what God had done from creation to the present day, and he tied the current situation in Athens to the eternal work of God. He made it personal and relevant to all of his hearers by reminding them that God created them. In essence, Paul served as a public theologian in Athens. That, I think, is what we are called here in political discussion and debate. More important than casting a vote is that we engage in our culture publicly as people who are theologians. And every Christian is a theologian because we simply, we know God, we know about God, and we are called to share that and teach that in not just our homes, but also in the other spaces we live. In the same way, God has given each of us a unique platform for public engagement. As Christians, we are all public theologians who serve in various domains in our community. So lastly, here's some questions that may help you as you think about how you engage in your specific domains and the spaces you live in and work in. First, identify the domain you are most often engaged in, and then identify a political issue that most directly impacts that domain, right? If you're in education, well, political issues around education would be your domain, right? If your domain is more in the public kind of community sector, if you work in a government position, right, where you're helping people in certain ways, transportation, uh, law enforcement, law defense and prosecution, if you are helping people and serving in a role in a business capacity where you're making transactions, where you're buying and selling and trying to promote maybe the success of your company. Well, what are the issues that most often come up in those settings? Next question then is, how should a biblical worldview shape your political perspective on that issue? Have you really taken the time to think about those issues that are most often coming up in your workplace and thought, what does the Bible speak into these issues? What does the Lord Jesus say about these things? Thirdly, how can this issue bring to light the nature of God and his redeeming work in Jesus? Right? Paul saw that statue in Athens, right, to an unknown God, and he used that. He said, this is a question there in their minds. I'm going to use that to bring to light the true nature of who God is. Finally, how can you engage others about this issue with civility and courage? Think about the specific people in that space, who they are, what it would look like to engage them. What ticks them off? What triggers them? How can you approach them in a way that's personal, loving, and caring about them as an individual person? Do you know their story? Do you know maybe what makes them tick? Well, if not, engage them first and see what those things are. Brothers and sisters, thank you so much for listening, and I hope this has been encouraging you. Blessings and peace on you.